What's up and welcome to MoAn Inc. If you're new here, then hello! My name is Erica and it is a pleasure to have you joining me today on the channel. Because for today's video, as you can see from the title, we are going to be chatting about all things Cicero context. Now, before we can get into that, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so that you know every single time I post in the future. And now that you've so kindly done that, let's get into the video. So just as a disclaimer before we get started, it is important that you are all aware we are only discussing the life of Cicero today. This is a context video, and I always have to say this because there are always people who are lost in the comments of these types of videos. We will not be talking about specifically his work. I will not be diving into any Latin or quotes or anything like that regarding Cicero, because today we are just going to be looking into his life and what influenced him to become the Cicero that we end up reading about in history. So, with that being said, Marcus Tullius Cicero was born in 106 BCE and dies in 43 BCE. Now, he is not born in the city of Rome, however, he does end up becoming a Roman statesman, but Cicero is born to a wealthy family outside the city in particular. Now, I do want to make this clear that the ancient world does not cater, as I always say, to rags to riches stories. Okay, we do not have people who are complete underdogs rising through the ranks, coming from no money and making an absurd amount of money and becoming incredibly famous. That doesn't happen. However, Cicero is probably the closest that we get to a rags to riches story. And that's because even though he was from a wealthy family, he did have a fantastic education, the best that their money could buy, which still sent him to Greece to go and study there and to study philosophy and all of that kind of stuff. Cicero did not have any family ties to the Roman political system. So he had to grind in a way that everybody else that we've looked into, or everybody else that we will look into, I have a lot of videos filmed, I don't know what order all of these are coming out, but when it comes to Roman statesmen, there was oftentimes some sort of a tie, even if it was just like an uncle or a grandfather or whatever it happens to be, and Cicero had none of that. So when we look at him rising through the ranks, he really had to start from ground zero and grind, make all the connections that he needed to by himself. Nothing was handed to him on a silver platter, aside from the wealth and the money that his family had. That's important. So as I said, Cicero studies in Greece. He has an incredible education where he learns the art of rhetoric and oration. And that's really what he's most famous for. In fact, he is still studied as one of the best speech givers throughout history, probably because we have so many speeches from him. And also he wrote copious amounts about how to make a good speech that people still use today. But Cicero is really famous for being an orator, for being somebody who was quote unquote like a lawyer in the ancient world. I don't want to say that because if you are familiar with the ancient world, you'll know that like lawyers as a job didn't really exist. And what people would do is that they would hire somebody who was really good at speaking to defend them in a court. And so Cicero was working a lot in that kind of a sense to make a name for himself. However, to get recognized and to push him through the Roman political ranks, he had to start from the basics, which meant that he needed two things in particular in order to get ahead. The first thing is that Cicero needed to hold a military position that was vital if you wanted to become anybody in ancient Rome. So he ends up doing that actually in 89 BCE. And what's really funny about this is that he holds his military position and no one has anything good to say about Cicero in the military. This man was not made to be in combat. He was not made to be in active war. But you know what? He did it because he knew that it was going to get him that leg up into the quaestorship, which is exactly what it did. Now, I haven't uploaded this video yet, but there will be a video coming out about the Roman ranking and political systems. And the quaestor is at the bottom, basically. That was the first position that you needed to hold in order to then rise through the ranks in order to then get to praetor and then ultimately to consul, which was what you had to do in the Roman Republic, because that's when this is all set, is during the Roman Republic. So Cicero ends up taking on a quaestorship in Sicily, actually, which is just an administrative role, administrative financial administrative role. That's exactly what a quaestor was. And he takes this up in 75 BCE in Sicily. Now, over the years, he does end up rising through the ranks. He ends up making a lot of political alliances, whilst also making a lot of political enemies. And along the way, he ends up coming into contact with Pompey. Now, Pompey is incredibly important during this period. He ends up being part of the first triumvirate, which we will get to in a hot second. But Cicero and Pompey end up really bonding over their mutual hate of this man called Crassus. Crassus is just a really rich guy in ancient Rome. But the way that these political alliances tended to work, if I'm being really blunt, if you hated the same person, you ended up getting along really well with this other politician. And it was more so like, okay, well, we both hate the same person. We both want to be higher than that same person. So we will combine our forces to get rid of that person. And that's exactly the way that Pompey and Cicero initially bonded. Now, throughout all these years, as I said, Cicero is rising through the ranks, right? So when he rises through the ranks, in 63, he ends up being made consul. I don't know why it took me so long to say that, but he ends up becoming consul, and this is the highest of the high, right? So when Cicero is consul, he has made it in society. And when he's become consul, he ends up making a bunch of speeches. Well, actually, prior to that, there are a bunch of speeches that are unbelievably important for Cicero's career, but in particular, in 63, he ends up making the first Catilinarian speech. Now, the Catilinarian speeches are the most famous Cicero speeches. If you guys have heard of O Tempora, O Mores, if you study Latin, you will have to read the Catilinarian speeches at some point. They are fantastic. Cicero ends up basically finding out that this guy called Catiline, that he actually beat to the consulship. Catiline has started like a little uprising against the Roman state, and Cicero is denouncing him in public, and these are so impressive. These are so beautifully written, and probably were just so amazing to listen to. This is really one of the first moments where Cicero starts being upheld as this protector of the Roman state, as this protector of the Roman Republic. Now, bear in mind that's super important, because we're now in 63, and things only go downhill from here. But this is really where Cicero establishes himself as, I am for the Roman Republic. We do not like people having ultimate power, and we do not like people going against the Roman state and the freedom that the Roman people have. Not more than 3 years later, Julius Caesar, who I'm sure we all know who Julius Caesar is, but he's an incredibly important figure at this point, and he's trying to form the first triumvirate. And he actually goes to Cicero and asks Cicero if he wants to join the first triumvirate, because Cicero is so highly regarded in ancient Rome. And Cicero decides that the first triumvirate is not constitutional. It is not what they should be doing if they are people of Rome and of the Roman state and all of that kind of stuff. And so he says no. Now this is one of Cicero's many political blunders, because Cicero has this thing where he picks his political alliances incredibly poorly. Incredibly. And what's interesting about this is that Pompey ends up becoming one of the members of the first triumvirate, which is Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus. The guy, bear in mind, that Cicero and Pompey supposedly hate. Pompey is now working with him. This is important. A number of things happen in a very short amount of time during this period, which do include some people getting to political power that do not like Cicero. And Cicero starts to see himself as being in a very vulnerable position where he is essentially in danger, okay? Not only his political position, but also his life. So as you would assume, he goes to Pompey, the guy that he used to have a great political alliance with, to ask for some kind of protection. And Pompey basically tells him to fuck off. And so in 58 BCE, Cicero flees Rome. Now, it is important that Cicero does have a wife at this point, and he does have a family, but he has a habit throughout all of his history that we know of. He has a habit of like leaving Rome whenever things get a bit sticky. And this is a situation where things have gotten very sticky. So he disappears from the city and goes to his other home. Now, when he's there, though, these people who are in political power, they state that Cicero is now in exile, which is a problem because it means he can't go home. And Cicero's a bit like, well, now what? Luckily for him, though, Pompey does come through on this, and the following year, in 57, Pompey says that this is absolutely ridiculous and that Cicero can come back. He's not in exile, and he can be recalled back to Rome. So in August of that year, he does go back to the city. Now, between 57 and 44, which is the other very important date that happens during this period of Rome, lots of stuff happens. And we know this because Cicero has a number of, like I said, he's probably the most widely kept writing from the ancient world. So we have lots of, whether it be philosophical writings, political speeches from him, letters. We have over like 900 letters from Cicero throughout his entire life. But basically this period I'm not really going to be focusing on because there's a lot of movement and there's a lot of little political things that are going on, but nothing as important as 44, which is where we're going to fast forward to, because that is the year, in case you guys don't know, that Caesar was assassinated in the Senate. Now, Julius Caesar seems to be somebody who was vying for this ultimate power, right? He was made dictator for life, which we will get into in a Caesar video, but basically all of this was crazy. He held like all of the political positions of Rome, and Cicero did not like him, and he made it very, very obvious, and at the front of everything that he said and that he did, every public appearance, he doesn't like Caesar, because he sees Caesar as being somebody who wants to take down the Roman Republic, which he did. And so when he is murdered, the interesting thing is that we know that Cicero had no hand in the murder. At least it is not recorded anywhere that Cicero was even aware that this was going to happen, that this assassination was going to happen. Now, Caesar was killed in the Senate. We also don't have any note of Cicero even being present in the Senate that day. So despite Cicero's hatred of Caesar, he had no hand in the murder. However, what is important is that obviously when the murder happens, this is a really turbulent time in ancient Rome. Okay, we're going from a republic to then becoming an empire, because Caesar, if you guys don't know, he then has his inheritance, so all of his positions and everything that he has, left to Octavian, who is his great nephew. Yeah. Very long story short, Octavian ends up making a second triumvirate with 3 people who were called, obviously himself, Octavian, who, like I said, ends up becoming Augustus. We then have Mark Antony, and then we have Lepidus. Okay, everybody always forgets that Lepidus exists. It's so funny. Poor Lepidus. He's the last member of this triumvirate. And when this triumvirate is made, Cicero is doing his best to try and disband it, because he knows trouble is around the corner. So Cicero tries to disband this. It's not working whatsoever. And in fact, as the tensions do rise between Mark Antony and Octavian, because they were ultimately going to do that anyways, as that's going on, they also all pretty much turn their hatred to Cicero. And what happens is that there is a public list, shall we call it, of executions, people who they're just like, nope, this person's got to die. And obviously at the top of that list is Cicero, because he does not like them. They know that he's been trying to get in the way, and he has also this entire time been publicly saying, this is a bad idea, we are going to lose the Republic, this is our freedom. If we have one person in power, it's going to be like the days of the kings all over again. If you don't know, Rome did start as a kingdom, it did have 7 kings. This is not for this purpose of the video, but they were abolished in like 509 BC, and everybody was like, we are never going to have a king again. And so when Cicero is talking to everybody and making his speeches, he is like, this is that all over again, but with these 3 people that just want ultimate power. This is not a good idea. So obviously he is put on the execution list. And as you can guess, Cicero disappears from Rome. This man runs, okay? He tries to get as far away from the city as possible. However, he is tracked down, and in 43 BC, he is killed. He is executed. Now, when he's executed, his head is cut off. I probably should have done a sort of trigger warning, I guess, if you're squeamish. Actually, this is probably the least squeamish of all the deaths that I've discussed on this channel, but it is quite brutal because Cicero's head is chopped off and also his hands are chopped off. And all 3 of these items, these body parts, are brought back to Rome and they are displayed on the rostra, which is the speaking platform in the forum, as like a warning, basically, because Cicero, that man did not hold back. And this was now a public display for everybody else saying, sure, if you want to do that, that's going to be great, but this is the fate that you are going to meet. So that is how Cicero dies. Cicero's legacy is really, as I said at the start of this video, for his oration and his rhetoric skills. And we'll be getting into those on the channel. I can probably do a whole other short video about the things that he says, because still now, if you were to look at people who give speeches, whether it be politicians or like literally anybody that has to get up and give a good speech, they use the same things that Cicero said once upon a time made a good speech. I mean, just off the top of my head, like for example, repetition. He was a big advocate for repetition in speeches. All you have to do is repeat the most important phrase even over and over and over again, and people will believe you. The more they hear something, the more they'll believe you. You should make the most important part of your speech rhyme, because people are going to remember rhymes much more than they're going to remember all the details of your speech. He said constantly that a good speechmaker always has a visual aid. He compares it actually to an actor having a costume and props. A speechmaker must always have a visual aid, whether it be a statue or even sometimes, like when we read his speeches, he will oftentimes get like the children of the person that he's defending. When he was doing like these law speeches, he would get the children to come up on stage and he'd be like, how could you rob this adorable child of their parent? All of that kind of stuff. And actually, and speaking of that, the most important thing that he said about giving a speech is that a good orator remembers that a speech is not about logic, it is about emotion. And if you can make somebody feel something, you will win them over no matter what. So those are just some examples, which hopefully you guys are listening to that going, oh my God, I see that in everything. Cicero was incredibly prolific. He was so amazing in so many ways, and he was also very grumpy in other ways. One of my favorite things that he does in his speeches is he'll always do the classic, we're here to talk about this today, and we're not gonna talk about the adultery, because we're here to talk about this other thing. And by nature of doing that, you know, you're talking about the adultery or the murder or whatever it happens to be. And I love that because he is very, very petty. Cicero is an incredible speech maker, but he's also just very, very funny to read. He is an incredible, an incredible orator. And I'm so excited to be getting into his speeches and to be diving into them, even though of course we'll be making jokes about them because that is what I do. Hopefully you guys will see just how influential he was and just how phenomenal of an ancient writer and person he was. So with all that being said, it's about time that I wrap up this video. You guys can find more links in the description below to other works of Cicero, because as I said, we will be going into each individual work and each individual speech as you guys really request them. If you guys want specific things, we'll be doing that. And we're going to be sort of doing clusters of speeches or clusters of his work. I want to start with the speeches and then we can move more into his philosophy or things like that, right? The morality side of it, da-da-da. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and I'll be seeing you next time with more videos detailing Cicero's work here on the channel. I'll see you guys then.